Welcome back, everybody. Another episode of Unfiltered HR. Emily here as usual. Today I have Jeffrey Pietrzak
Got it.
with me. Is that Polish?
It is Polish.
Okay.
I mean,
Oh, it's not.
I mean Buffalo, right? Of course it's Polish.
I feel like I've mastered Polish pronunciations over time being here.
Okay.
I remember when I first got here and I looked at like employee posters at places I worked.
Where
And I was like, I have no idea.
are you from?
I'm from Warsaw, New York, which is like
Oh.
an hour. Yeah.
It's also the Polish town.
That's very funny. It's not, and I'm not Polish at
Okay,
all.
very
But
good.
yeah, the Polish population is very much, they put Buffalo thing.
Oh, yeah.
That's more like country, Port Rochester.
Oh yeah. Yes. This country.
Once you're the South Buffalo, maybe, but there's not Polish population anymore. But
Isn't one the Watchbuck? What do you mean? Anyway.
yes,
I digress. Okay.
we digress.
Yes.
Yeah, so Jeff is here today to talk about today's topic. So Jeff is basically, we're like the same, right?
Yeah, very much.
Jeff is an
Yes.
HR expert. He also has his own business in providing fractional HR services of some sort to businesses. So today we're basically here on the defense to talk about why what we do is valuable and matters. But all joking aside, really why HR is a very valuable or human resources related, people perspective in your business is a very valuable perspective to have in your business, and maybe demystify, destigmatize some of the bad rap that this, seat at the table, that they would have that in our head gets or not, and really why people should be embracing this and seeking to get more value out of this function of their business. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, see the table. I think.
Well, tell us about what you do first. You know what I do.
They know
But,
what you do.
Yeah, your business is work exceptional.
Yeah.
Right.
Company is work exceptional, and we have sort of like three big buckets of work. Bucket one would be executive coaching, which is, I guess, smaller part of our business. All levels across organizations, typically C-level, but director and up is what it ends up being, depending on the kind of investment the company looks to make. The next bucket is sort of learning and development plus organizational development and design. So working with startups or high growth organizations in terms of where is the company today, where does the company want to go for typically it's design and sort of the organizational development components of the business. And then oftentimes leadership development, learning and development, professional development sort of falls there too. And then the third bucket it's typically would be fractional CHR type work. So not as much as like the PO or sort of like the relationship you have where it's like, this is your compliance requirement. This is your, fill in the blank requirement from an HR perspective, but more sort of strategic overview or strategic sort of oversight of HR teams in fractional capacity to try to bridge a gap between sort of one head of HR and the next head of HR. So when then
So more like system strategy, less like nitty gritty, helping to onboard employees.
Yeah, although I have
Nice.
funny you say that because I have done quite a bit of that as well, and a lot of it depends on the nature of the engagement, the size of the business, the size of the HR team, if there is an HR team, right? And if it's a small team, then typically these fractional roles, you are just jumping and doing whatever you need to in front line up through strategy. Where if it's a larger team, often sort of where that company is in sort of its lifespan, a larger team, it's more strategic one-on-ones like you would typically feel if you're sort of head of HR in an organization.
So yeah, just to kind of round out our self-proclaimed credibility on this topic. So I, again, like, because this is my podcast and most people know what I do, but yeah, I'm working with a lot of small, technically by definition, small businesses. So always certainly under 200 employees,
Okay.
usually under 100 employees. Oftentimes my clients are family-owned businesses or something similar. But also across all industries in my case, right? So, when it comes to getting perspective and input on the value that this functioning contaminated business, I've seen it pretty much applied everywhere. But tell us about what your typical client size is and if it's different or like typical industry focus.
Yeah, so similarly, sort of industry agnostic, we'll work with organizations, whether it's nonprofit, for-profit, publicly traded, or private, family-held businesses, whatever it might be, agnostic to industry. Typically, the engagement is going to, the company size is dependent on the engagement. So for learning and organizational development work, it's often with organizations that are actually quite large. We work with Fortune 500, publicly traded, multi-billion dollar global companies, and a lot of that kind of work, particularly when it comes to development of learning materials, when it just really becomes very formalized in that way. The fractional work, typically I'm looking at businesses that are 2,000 employees and up, but often less than $1 billion. And so where they end up being in their lifespan is they're either ready to grow and they want to make sure they get it right, say from a people perspective, or they have grown and either somebody stepped away or maybe they made some missteps along the way, and sort of bring in as a thought partner and or a strategic partner to help guide the ship a little bit and get them in a really good place. So that doesn't typically happen at really, really multi-billion dollar organizations. There's a certain organizational size that makes sense for that. And so that's where that fractional work often comes into play. And then the executive coaching work is it's often nonprofits actually in that sort of world, sort of offering guidance how to be as successful as possible as a nonprofit organization for some newer CEOs or newer leadership, moving into those roles and trying to be successful in that world.
Yeah, I love. So between both of us, I think like we cover all a ton of ground, right? So small businesses, very large businesses, very corporate businesses, down to some of my faces, my clients very much are insistent that they don't want to become corporate, and which is I don't even know what people really mean by that. I mean, I know what they mean, but it's like there's a difference between becoming corporate and like sterile and having structure and infrastructure to be able to actually operate efficiently. But yeah, I think it's cool, and I obviously have talked before right now recording this podcast, but it's cool.
Once, maybe twice. You've spoken before.
It's cool. Yeah, well, we follow each other on LinkedIn and see, but it's cool that we have really similar experiences with all of this, even serving somewhat different populations from a business standpoint. Because, I read something recently, like, I forget what it was, but they said, like, it's people all the way down, meaning, like, no matter where you go or what size organization you are or what industry you are, it's a group of people doing things in the same dynamics are going to be at play, the same rules and laws and risks apply, like the same chaos is, allowed to ensue, allowed to mess there. So I think, because a lot of times, and we'll kind of go where we're going now, the perspective I see with a lot of my clients is they very unwillingly, almost begrudgingly, are coming to the table to finally get help with like focusing on and actually applying and channeling resources and energy to this element of their business. Usually it's after they've experienced so much pain that they finally realize like, oh, maybe there is something to this, or they're getting sued, or they have this, terrible problem that needs someone come in to do an investigation or help solve. Sometimes it could be court mandated.
True. Yes. Benefits and outings.
So, I think that's my perspective. And, a lot of businesses just think, well, we don't need that stuff. That's for other businesses of this size or this industry or whatever. They think that they're special and unique and they won't benefit from or don't need this, function or seat at the table in their business. But I've never found that to really be true. In reality, there's always value to be gained from this. So
I agree. I think part of it, there's a couple things to unpack there. I think it feels like we're growing up a little bit if we're like, okay, I guess maybe we need an HR person, and maybe we need a handbook. Maybe we need somebody that's focused more day to day around maybe employee relations. Maybe we've grown and the population is the size where the founder, whoever typically or historically had done it, can't keep up with it, or things have happened and it sort of feels like, okay, we better bring an HR person. And so the price of admission often is the HR person can handle employee relations. Maybe they support payroll. Oftentimes, these days payroll falls under finance. Doesn't much matter. Hey, we probably should have a handbook. Like there's a lot of like functional things that I think people think of when they think of HR. It's like, okay, it's kind of a grow up, bring in an HR person. And that's true. That is absolute truth to like, we have to focus on compliance. We have to make sure we do X, Y, and Z so we can be great, keep ourselves out of trouble, whatever it is.
Oh, yeah.
I think often the challenge is a lot of this is on HR people, right? Not to just be too on the nose. A lot of this is on us to say like, okay, my price of admission, if you will, to work here was like, I can help with the handbook. I can help with employee relations. And it's sort of like, that's my day to day. And my preference, and I know your preferences as well, is that yes, like that's sort of what gets you in the door. Of course, you should be able to do these things, but really your job is to be as business savvy as the founder of the business, as leader of the business, and help support from a strategic perspective on what we're trying to do to drive business forward, right? Through people.
Yeah. So when we were talking before, you were saying, what is problem? So what it like going off of that, you think the problem is that a lot of people in the HR seat or a lot of HR professionals out there, they aren't demonstrating or living up to really the potential of what the role is. So that's contributing to its reputation.
I think so. There's this historical component that a lot of us probably grew up with, which is like, ooh, I have to go to HR, which is like, I did something wrong, or I have to ask for permission, or something's happening that now means I have to go to the HR person's office and talk to the generalist, right?
Yeah.
And to be fair, there still is a component, obviously a responsibility that the human resources team has to support a business in that way. But I think a lot of HR professionals, I think that the HR profession as a whole has had a really difficult time telling the story of like, yes, of course that comes with certain roles within HR, but really when we think about people and driving a business forward, right? Somebody who has a strategic perspective on how people drive that business forward. I think that's where what ends up falling under HR, people can actually add value and have a difficult time articulating that, or even having a difficult time understanding like that door is there. I just have to open it and take some action. As a professional that supports the people in the organization, not just make sure they get their benefits and pay.
Right. That payrolls want to really.
Right. And to that point, though, many years ago, a really smart chief HR officer shared pretty directly with me, like, people don't get paid if benefits aren't right. We don't get to do the fun stuff, right? Sometimes the fun stuff feels like, sometimes it's training, sometimes it's whatever.
Right. Yeah, you're not gonna have credibility, or you're gonna offer a leash as an HR professional to show more value if you can't even do the basics, right? Or
that's right. And so to me, I use the phrase the price of admission. Your price of admission is you can do those things, but I'm grateful as a business owner that you can do those things. But I'm truly grateful if you can do those things, get them kind of out of the way, if you will, and actually do other things that drive the business forward, be a thought partner, a critical thinker, right? Instead of saying we have a retention problem, so maybe we don't pay enough, say like there might be something bigger going on here that we have to solve for. Like, how do we actually dig into that?
yeah. So okay, so I agree. I think there are I don't think there are. I mean, I'll just say it. This is going to be a hot take, I guess. Maybe controversial.
We knew that going in.
There aren't. We'll change the name of the podcast to HR Hot Takes. There's not a lot of great HR people out there. I totally believe that, and I'm I consider myself to be one. I mean, I guess the jury's out on that. You can all vote when what do you think?
Same here. It's okay.
I have a successful business doing it, so I don't know. Do you think that means something? But regardless of that, it's like you said, HR people. A lot of them are not business people, and they're kind of functioning in this like sidelined channel where it's almost like they are, I don't know. It's like they're justifying their existence without thinking about the greater context of it. Like, how can they contribute to business outcomes and serve the business? Not just. And that's a question I get a lot as well, is which we'll get into, is does HR exist to serve the business or the employees? Which I want to kick on that a little bit. So I do think that's part of the issue. Is there's a lot of people in these HR seats that are acting as the stereotypical red tape, or they're just not helping to bring solutions to the table to solving people problems or providing value to people, or really being strategic or mindful, or just thoughtful about how they can bring more and out of that resource. um
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of that is it is in this, not to overgeneralize and or be thoughtful about this, um, but in my experience, anecdotal as it may be, many HR or people are focusing on what we can't do, right? What are the things we're not allowed to do? Whether that's
because that's
from
part
our
of it.
right,
So,
for sure. We absolutely have to be thoughtful about things that we have to sort of be mindful of that we are or are not allowed to do. But oftentimes the instinct isn't necessarily, again, in my experience, problem solving. Let's come up with a creative solution. What can we do? What's creative? What's different? Versus let's pull out the handbook and make sure that we're following all the rules in the handbook, which is not particularly creative. It's not particularly critical,
right.
and it's oftentimes it even goes as far as to say it's like, well, this policy in the handbook isn't working, but that's the policy,
Yeah.
right? And not to overgeneralize it, but I think under the HR profession, we have a responsibility to say, like, okay, what about this isn't working, right? What within what we can and can't do, like of what we can do, where can we focus our time and attention to this particular policy that make sure it works for our business, maybe for our business unit, and be really thoughtful around, not being sort of that red tape or telling everybody what we can't do.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, what we're describing is, and I think this happens all the time, HR people, they lose sight of the forest in the trees. So, like, your job is to protect the company that is part of the job.
Yes.
It is,
Yes.
compliance is part of the job, like knowing the laws, making sure there's compliance. Yes, knowing your handbook, making sure you're consistent with all your policies in it, because that's being inconsistent is worse than having no policies at all. Like all of these things, right? Like making sure all the paperwork's filled out and checking all the boxes. But you can't become so obsessed with all of that you end up losing the greater idea and purpose of the mission, which is like really the goal, and the really great HR people help solve that and provide solutions to do those things, but it's still in a way that allows us business to operate as cleanly as possible and as efficiently as possible. It shouldn't bog things down, and that is a lot of the time what these HR people are doing. And I don't know if it's like a power trip thing or
Well, I think about that often, and I don't mean to be so sort of like philosophical about it, but I think about this with any employee. So this is not just HR people; it's just so people within an organization in general. It's like, are you adding energy to the system, or are you sucking energy from the system,
Yeah.
right? And so, if you're adding energy to the system, you're thinking about how we can challenge ourselves, how we can challenge the team, the organization, whatever it is, to do something bigger, better, different, whatever it is. Or are we taking energy out of the system and saying, like, these are the things that we absolutely, can't do, and that's the end of it, versus like, I wonder how we can creatively solve for what I feel like we can't do, right? And I think um
Yeah.
HR often feels like the energy out of the system versus adding energy and enthusiasm back into the sort of system of the company.
Yeah, like we need to do this, but it doesn't mean we can't do that. Right. We can do this, and let's figure out a way to get what you want and also do this. And there's a way to do that. But you have to be skillful.
Right. I mean, there's certain times where I've had conversations like, well, I mean, what you want to do is actually against the law, so we can't do that. But here's what we can do, right? And you immediately go to like the things you can actually solve for. And I think sometimes where HR professionals fall short is well, you just simply cannot do that. And don't turn the corner to like, but creatively, what can we do? I think I've got some ideas. And let's bounce those ideas and so go to our place of curiosity and critical thinking.
Yeah, I've had many clients like that. It's so fun to teach their mind too. But yeah, inside an organization, if that's how HR is perceived, then people really stop coming. Like problems, right? And problems aren't until the whole thing is on fire, and it's like DEFCON 5 or whatever, like late stage problem solving, because they've avoided going there to begin with, and that is not valuable or beneficial for the business at all, and really undermines the whole function as it is. So it needs to become like a trusted, valuable partner and see on the table.
Agreed.
So I think that is valid, and we all as HR professionals maybe can own that. You can take
I think we should take full ownership of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely, you should.
Yes, that's true. Like earn your seat at the table. I guess is what we're saying.
100%.
And we do have to do that. But what do you do? Like there is another element at play which I've seen with clients where they yeah, I guess it contributes to that too, but they, regardless of, like, there isn't, maybe they're not giving the HR professional an opportunity to show or provide the value, right? Like if you're an HR generalist inside an organization and you report up into an executive leadership team with the CEO, and you're really caught out of all decision making, decisions don't get communicated to you until like really things have already come with the whole course. So for a hire, for example, you're informed that they're hiring someone, and now your job is to just process the paperwork, right? Make sure that they're onboarded correctly that way. Um, how do you solve that problem?
Yeah, I mean, like any other sort of department, there is certainly a hierarchy, and there's a point of entry, which at that point of entry, sort of that frontline position, it is difficult to get traction that makes you feel like you're contributing sort of the bigger picture of things, and you're sort of like the tactical I have to do certain things, and I think I have these conversations. It's now sort of HR professionals, even though that's what we're talking about here, but this is true of professionals at the front line across any organization, which is like, how do you think about being an advocate and proactively sort of sharing ideas you have, right? An example might be like, hey, by the time a hiring decision gets to me, you've made most of the decisions along the way, but my job is to do sort of X, Y, and Z. But every time I do this, I notice that there's a challenge or there's a slowdown of the hiring, but like there's something that maybe I can now manage up to leadership.
There's a lot of, we have a lot of turnover in this role or these roles.
Right,
Like perhaps
hiring this one also a lot.
you need to like,
Yeah.
maybe we're doing something wrong during the hiring process, and I could provide another perspective on it.
Right. And so to me, any professional, any true professional, no matter what your job title is or what function you sort of have within an organization, any true professional has a responsibility to say, like, I'm seeing consistently this challenge. I have a responsibility to share not just what I'm observing, but if I can be critically, thoughtful about what to do next, I should think about possible solutions, whether that's timing solution and involvement of a person solution or some actual process. And that sort of opens the door to the opportunity to take on stretch assignments and do other things and become a thought partner, HR, sales, or otherwise. And I think HR in particular falls into the trap of just executing the thing that I'm supposed to do versus saying like, oh, maybe I have the freedom and responsibility to share how we could do something differently.
So in the case where it is maybe, and I am sure you've seen this too, I don't know if it's maybe hubris is the right word, but you have these, whatever, CEOs or COOs or whomever it may be, people that think like, I think a lot of people think that they are as qualified as anyone else to do a lot of the things that HR does, right? There isn't maybe a lot of respect for the fact that it's kind of a sword that gets sharpened from a standpoint over time. And there are people that are going to be able to do it better through their experience, their skills, their unique, whatever traits as a human being, to be perceptive with people or, communicate, whatever it might be. So like, how do you, if you had to, you know, give a message or explain to these leaders, like what it is that they're missing out on and try to convince them of the fact that, there really is value to having, again, this perspective or dispelling this fact that they don't need it or they can do it just as well. How would you tackle that?
Yeah, I think I would start again, honestly, with the HR professional, sort of the people team professional. The people team professional, HR professional, has an absolute responsibility. I don't even know if it's in my opinion, but I'll say in my opinion, to understand the drivers of the business, whatever they can have access to regarding the P&L, whatever they can have access to regarding whether it's a product, a process, people, all the things that actually drive the business and the success of the business forward. And sort of bring that perspective to the table and say, like, as much as I can, I'm not the COO, the CEO, whatever it is, but from my perspective, I understand the nuances of our business. I understand the business very, very well. Just like you understand the business very well. So I'm not an HR person. I'm a business person also. Mm-hmm. I just have to have a lens around people and how people function within the business, right? And so first, anytime that I've had success in a role as an HR person at the table, the first thing I'm thinking about is, what are the drivers of the business, right? What do I need to know about what's happening in the business today before I can even bring up a conversation around what's happening under sort of people and or HR?
That you have no credibility.
None whatsoever, right? And you become like I don't mean to just sort of categorize this way, the handbook toting HR person that we used to dread having to talk to 25 years ago. And so you don't have that opportunity to exhibit entrepreneurial spirit, to understand that you exhibit, you do have business savvy. You have to have all, in my opinion, all those things first to be able to have like a true seat at the table and talking about like, okay, let's talk about now how that affects the people, how that affects who we might want to hire, who we might want to hire when, why what feels like an administrative sort of cost center type of an investment is actually an investment we think will drive revenue for the business, will make a difference in terms of how the business functions. Um, and I think not everybody is capable of turning that corner, and or not everybody understands how important it is to understand the business first before we talk about anything else.
But the point is, I think we're making is there are HR people like that out there.
Oh,
There
yeah.
are people that can sit in the HR seat and provide that value to your business. And if you don't have that person in that seat now, it does not mean that that is what it's capable of, and that's what you have to settle for long term. Yeah.
Well, that's true, and I think a lot of professionals in general, HR professionals or otherwise, forget that we have a responsibility as professionals is to learn as much as possible, to be curious people, right? If we're curious and we learn about the business, we will learn about the people within the business and things that drive the business. With that curiosity should come intellect and the ability to have a sophisticated, well-articulated conversation about what it is we're trying to solve for, HR otherwise. And so now this is about hiring and hiring for curiosity, but if somebody's in that HR seat and they're not exhibiting that, doesn't mean they can't. Sometimes just the door needs to be open for them to say, like, no, I need you to start to understand more about the business before we talk about some other things with it. It's just HR.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess maybe we're talking about collectively a mindset shift for HR people and how what their true role is and what their true value potential is, and I think their value demand is in the business. But also, yeah, leadership in those in the business to really take a different perspective on what can this function provide for the business, and it's probably way more than they're new vetting because I mean, if you think about it, you hire someone to like purposely and specifically focus 100% of their time on, operations, right? Like, or purchasing or marketing or sales. Like, why would you not have someone as a dedicated person in your business? Of course, like some of it has to be decentralized out to like managers managing, and the HR can never take the role. It should never take the role of managers to like be having the performance coaching conversations of setting expectations and all of that stuff. But they still are the oversight person for all of the behavior and activities of the managers doing that and how they're doing it, and are they doing it successfully, and are they doing it in a way that actually drives business outcomes. Why would you not have someone dedicated in your business to focusing all their time and energy and making sure all of that is being done the best way possible from hire to fire, when people are your number one cost usually in the business from a resource standpoint, and probably even source of liability for most businesses.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it goes back to one of the earlier points you made in this conversation, which was if you work with a small business and sometimes this is the first HR hire they're going to make, they oftentimes it feels like, all right, I'm going to pay whatever I'm going to pay for this position, and it's just going to come out sort of my payroll. I think if those hiring managers or if HR, sort of professionals were able to prove the value they bring versus like, yeah, we're gonna have a handbook, yeah, we're gonna have whatever. Yes, we're gonna have those things, but really why I'm here is to make sure that I can be a thought partner to you, right? I think if a founder of a small business brought in the HR person with the perspective of like, okay, let's make sure that we're buttoned up from a compliance standpoint, absolutely. But the person I'm hiring is a thought partner, right? A thought partner in how we can hire, how we can grow the business through people, how maybe we can save money, make money, whatever it is. Oh, and they also happen to have a really strong understanding of HR operations or HR compliance, right? I think that perspective really helps sort of turn the story a little bit around like what you're actually hiring if you're looking at a true sort of people business partner or people professional versus say like an HR generalist.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Like, do you even have the right expectation going in of what you should be getting from this person? And I think in most cases, business owners don't because they're not ACE people either. So how you don't even know what it is, don't know. which, I don't know, but like I've helped my clients hire HR people as well. And that's one of the like greatest benefits of that is like if you had to make this hire on your own, definitely you would end, and then making a giant mistake, I'm sure, because you don't even know what you don't know about questions to ask or how to determine whether this person be qualified.
Oftentimes you're basically saying like, or maybe payroll doesn't live with finance, we want it to live with HR. So the first question would be like, do you know how to run payroll? And do you know how to write a policy? Do you know? And those are important things. I don't mean to minimize them, but to me, at least like that phrase again, that's your price of admission. Yes, of course I could do those things. Those will be done.
Yeah.
I can also have a thoughtful, strategic conversation with you around maybe how we can grow the business through people, what our hiring decisions are, and those kinds of things. And I think
The advisor role.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so question.
Sure.
I mean, I'm gonna ask a few questions.
Sure.
Sure, I have thoughts and opinions, but let's get them out in the open and talk about it. Because I know these are questions that I get a lot from business owners or business leaders. When does a business need HR?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, it depends on what kind of HR person we're talking about, I'd say. That's a good question.
I don't think there's a right or wrong answer.
No, I don't either.
And I get this question all the time. It's a lengthy answer, and big Laura on the side probably.
Yeah, I don't want to be obnoxious about it, but I think it really matters circumstantially about what you're trying to accomplish. If your business genuinely is having a difficult time with policy, procedure, employee relations, it's having a difficult time with sort of somebody in offices running payroll, wherever it is, right? You feel like payroll should be with HR. If there are a handful of functional things that are constantly and consistently falling through the cracks, then that's probably a good indicator that you need at least a frontline HR person, right? And ideally, as we talked about in this conversation, a frontline HR person that can also be a thought partner to you around what's happening with people. But at the very least, if you're consistently missing those things, if you are sort of unfortunately involved in a lawsuit, whatever, it's probably a good indicator that you either need an internal HR person, you need someone like yourself that operates sort of like in this, professional organization relationship, something that provides the HR support that the team needs.
So as problems become
consistent and sort of continue.
When the symptom
Have
started
to make it
feeling that okay,
Right.
that's definitely
That's sort of
a common road.
yeah,
to,
that's one point of entry for sure. Another point of entry to me is, let's say those things are actually pretty well buttoned up, whether it's functionally the ops team or whomever is sort of handling those things well. Payroll does finance, or finance handles payroll. We never miss it. We don't really have employee relations issues because we did pay at some point for a handbook, whatever. Those things are good, but we're looking to grow. We want to grow as a business, and we've got either private equity funding. We've got something good happening. We're ready to grow, but before we do that, we want to make sure that we bring in a professional to the sounding board about what the design of our organization should be from an organizational development perspective. Like, how should we be thinking about where we invest our money back into our people, right? Are there opportunities where somebody's a manager now, they will be a director in a year from now because that seat we likely believe will open? What do we need to do between now and then to prepare them for being able to fill that seat, right? So that's another point of entry, either for an HR consultant to come in, or to bring somebody in from sort of an organizational development or leadership development, talent development is what it's usually called these days, perspective, right? Also, we're growing like crazy. We probably need somebody who can come in and help us better understand what our recruiting needs are and how to sort of achieve those recruiting needs, right? If we're good with an Indeed license and we get us post jobs and we're good with it, maybe we're good. Or do we need somebody really spearheading that, right? So a lot of it depends on sort of where the business is, where it's either successful or unsuccessful related to some of the things we talk about from the sort of employee relations perspective. And then what do we want to do next?
Yeah, I think your choices are like, so people are always, when they ask me this question, they're looking for an answer that's like, when you have exactly 22 employees, or like, usually they're looking for something headcount related, which is totally, there's absolutely no, I mean, certainly there are times where, okay, yeah, there are thresholds where I would recommend it, but I don't think that's really a relevant marker. Or
No, it's not. It's really hard to get
I think
that.
like the point you kind of are making in general, which is a point of how you want to use HR too, once it isn't, in terms of who, like, yeah, what kind of person should you be looking for? Is it a more administrative office manager type person, payroll administrator, or a real HR generalist who's strategic? But really, like, do you want to be reactive about people issues in your business or people opportunities or your people in general? Or do you want to be proactive? Do you want to make um, strategic decisions and view this as a strategic part of your business that you can be strategic about, proactive about when you look at the future of where you want to go and how you want to grow, and recognizing that these things are the decisions on these things are going to help you get there or not. So yeah, I think that's the ultimate choice organizations have to decide with HR problem. I think, do you want to address this area reactively or proactively? And then that probably results in every other decision after that.
Yeah, I mean, the reactive versus proactive is a great perspective, right? Because I think I will say that the strongest HR professionals that I've worked with are proactive, right? They know how to set the agenda. They know how to bring to the table, proverbial or otherwise, table like what we need to be doing versus what we need to respond to that's already happened, right? You're constantly thinking ahead around what might happen next.
Yeah, I don't know if we learn these things in business school or whatever. I might have, yay. But like, this concept of like a SWOT analysis, right? Like, I mean, the whether you're gonna call it that or not, like if you're doing strategic planning, that's in essence in some way what you're doing.
Yeah.
External and internal, opportunities and threats and challenges and things. And if yeah, I think there should be a column on that for talent and people related opportunities, threats,
Sure.
issues. So making it a part of your strategic planning, I think, is extremely smart. Yeah.
I agree. I think it's important that I think the most successful and the sort of the most effective HR professionals that I've worked with bring an entrepreneurial spirit to the conversation. It's not administrative so much as it is I'm a business partner with you as well. I can't emphasize that enough. Whether it's through a simple SWOT analysis or something else or strategic planning, like it's just I will assume all of the other things are happening. Quality relations, compliance, all the things. Let's assume those are happening. So now that we can all assume that those things are happening, let's talk about the really good stuff, the stuff that really drives the business forward. And that's really what I hope for when it comes to working with HR pros and, seeing people come up is, hey, I want to be an HR professional. I get that all the time. I want to be an HR. And I often challenge them to fit until they're in it and then they don't want to do it anymore.
I get the question I get on untapped clients is, why do you do this?
Well, it's because they see all the nonsense that you have to deal with, right? There's a big portion of, I mean, I don't necessarily know that that's the conversation we're having today, but there is a big portion that comes with HR. We do have to deal with some really ugly things. We have to deal with some very serious matters, and we have to be absolutely confidential about them. And for as much as I prefer to talk about, I think the fun stuff, being an entrepreneur in people, there is a lot that comes with being involved in HR that is very serious that we do have to take seriously. Again, that's part of the Pietrzak mission, right? That's what you have to be able to pay to be able to do all the
Solve like problems well. Yeah. Yeah. And again, that we were talking about making a choice. Like, do you want to be reactive about people matters in your business? Or you want to be proactive, but you're going to have to be, even if you choose to be proactive, there you will always need to be somewhat reactive. Things are going to happen that are just completely unpredictable because it's people.
Yeah, it seems yes.
But you're right. The measure of a great HR, talent in your business is, can they be proactive while still handling like the reactive while, but the homework you don't find hopefully will reduce a lot of the need to be reactive. Yeah. But that is the value of it for sure. It's like when we talk about it being like not just taking administrative burden off things and like checking all the boxes and getting all the things done and you compliant, but that is definitely an unsung hero part of the job as well, which is you do deal with all the ugly stuff and usually without a lot of appreciation because there's usually a loser and onto one side of these bad people situations, and so you're going to be the bad guy to somebody, and that's just your job to take there and take it and be the mature person who doesn't kind of diffuses the emotion of the situation. And I think that's a super undervalued but extremely value add part of I know what I do or for the best HR professionals that I see in the business. And recognizing that for business owners, you need someone who can be sit there and handhold and be the adult, like the ultimate adult in the room, which that's what HR is, and just be super, neutral, unbiased, and kind of diffuse situations, be that coach and advisor in the toughest situations in businesses, which I would argue always involve people.
They do. They do. So in most businesses, if they're still in existence, are hopefully successful, right? Things are going well enough to continue to pay payroll. And so it's a lot of times the people challenges that derail things. And I think I mean, to that point, as an HR professional, whether I've been internal to a business or, for the last 3.5 years with my company, external, I try to be ever present, right? That I'm not only there when the bad things happen, that I'm constantly there as a sounding board. I'm always available, both proactively and like sort of the door is open if it's sort of the nature of the consulting relationship I have where I'm available, so that we talk all the time, right? And so that if something does come up, that's not the only time I or whoever go drop
With the Grim Reaper.
right. So like the people team, right? The people team is always available here to help support you, guide you, offer thoughts, be a thought partner, whether it's a CEO or any level of the organization. We also happen to be available for when things go slightly awry and some bad decisions have been made, and we have to help solve for those bad decisions.
That trust is paramount.
Right.
So,
Right.
So on that note, another question. Okay. Is HR for the business or is it for the employee?
Yeah, so HR does, okay, I believe strongly that HR has a responsibility to protect the business, right? Protect the business from all the crazy, whatever can potentially happen with people, right? And also protect the business from a compliance perspective, right? So we have to make sure we're doing the things that we're responsible for to protect the company. But it doesn't mean it's exclusive of being there for all people, right? So it's a people team, it's a people department helping to support every employee in the organization. And so we want to protect them as well, right? So everybody's part of the company.
I think a good way of putting it is your HR people are there to protect the business, which sometimes means protecting the business from itself.
Yes.
Which means leadership as well. Although you can't ultimately, leaders can choose to do the wrong thing, but at least you're there to say, this is likely the wrong thing.
We should be there to say that. I think a big part of this conversation is many HR professionals don't have the confidence, the courage, whatever you want to call it, to be able to say, you could do that, but here's why I think that would be the wrong decision, or here's what I think might be a better decision, right? Here's why you can't do that, but here's what you can do. And of these two options, what do you think makes the most sense? And how can we partner with you? And really constantly sort of negotiate how best to handle each situation as they come up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, that's a frustrating question. So, when I get asked that question, is it for the business or the employee? Ultimately, I guess the answer is it is for the business. And the only time you're going to be making, though, you should be making a negative decision for the employee is when it is only because it's in the best interest of the business. But you can't, like, if a decision to the immediate benefit of the employee would negatively impact the business, it can't say all the time, but most of the time it doesn't mean that means that actually in the best thing for the employee, because when you put individual interests over the interests of the business, that threatens the business, which then does threaten the individual because they're working there and their livelihood is there. And so if the business fails, then it fails everyone that's working in and for the business. So it really is like this ecosystem.
HR paradox to be like covered.
Yeah, but I wish more employees would realize that fact, because they kind of, again, they lose the forest in the streets as well, where, taking out the reduction in force or something, people, obviously, of course, understandable that they're upset, they're stressed out.
Sure.
And, I can
handle it well.
Yeah. But I think most people go home and eventually realize, like, okay, I understand why they had to make this decision. But it's kind of like, or someone goes in and they demand a pay raise up certain on. The business is like, listen, you just literally cannot afford that. And if they give you that, and of course, everyone else is going to want more too. And that's a scaling issue that we cannot afford. And, I don't, it's hard, it's so frustrating sometimes because people assume the worst, but it's like, this is for the best of everyone here. And you have to trust that like leaders in the organization are making decisions that are in the best interest of everyone in the business. Now, of course, there would be exceptions, so that's not true. And there's terrible people who are awfully selfish and, are exploiting people and all of that. But I can tell you, I've never had a client like that. And in 99% of businesses, I would argue, especially small businesses, that's not the case. But
I think it sort of naturally makes it sort of an us, if you will, us versus them perspective. And it's really not. And I think sort of underscoring so many components of the conversation here is that historically, I think HR probably hasn't done itself any favors as a department within a business to not make it feel like it's us versus them. Because we go to HR when something bad happens. We go to HR when there's a problem with our benefits. We go to HR when it's, when we need something, right? If we do ask for a raise, we have to bring in HR, and it's just always like this underlying like HR is here when all bad things
or
happen.
if you ever get in trouble, HR's going to be there. You ever went less out, HR's going to be there.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, of course there's true. Like functionally, there's some truth to the fact that HR happens to be there as the ultimate adult in the room to help support really difficult decisions. But I think sort of this idea of an omnipresent people team that's here to support everybody in the organization uh, helps me start to feel more like, okay, there's a people team here, and the people team is here to support me, and I can use them as a sounding board. I get conversations with them. And I doesn't mean that I'm the CEO. I could be, an entry level, first job ever employee, and I've got a people team that I can bounce ideas off of, right? So we can have a conversation with a difficult time maybe I'm having with another employee, so that it doesn't escalate and come to a head to the point of like we have to really have a different kind of conversation. We're always here for you to help support you, and I think it helps when we don't only show up when it's time for raises, time for benefits enrollment, time for the 401k conversation. Like oftentimes the HR just shows up in those moments, and that's how we associate ourselves with HR as employees.
They're maybe like the cleanup.
Yeah, and that's such a disservice because all the other good stuff is what really drives the business forward. How we feel like I'm part of something bigger as an employee, and I think that's historically anyway a big miss that HR teams find themselves in organizations, particularly large ones, but it's true in smallest.
Yeah. So, what do you think about this statement? HR is the conscience of the organization.
I think we're the voice of reason.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we're the voice
Is that
of
what
reason.
conscience is?
I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, I love that. Now let's just go really deep into the idea of conscience. What is
I know.
conscious?
It probably it is. I think I have a difficult time with that word. I would say that.
Well, it's that a conscience, right? Is it the voice in your head that's always like kind of giving? I mean, maybe I assume most people have this. We talk about sociopaths a lot for some reason on the podcast.
I was just gonna say same thing. Like, okay, well, let's talk about sociopaths.
I mean, it's crazy now. Right. See a doctor. But yeah, it's like that voice in your head that's like the barometer check or whatever of okay, is this the right thing? Is this wrong? It's like your gut, like.
Yeah.
But it's asking about right and wrong in terms of like your own created sense of that, so there is some like subjectivity and potentially bias for that, but I think I kind of see it as like I'm meant to be the neutral party. And I don't know if you see this, but people comment all the time, like my clients do, oh my god, you're so cool, you're so calm, like how do you stay so calm? It's like because I mean my role is designed to be that way, so I am impartial. I'm not emotionally involved with relationships that you have with your staff, and it works because when you are, and of course it's going to cloud your judgment and making hard decisions if they need to happen, or not being able to be as clear as possible in people when setting expectations or avoiding difficult conversations. And, part of my goal is to stay removed so that I can see it super clearly. It doesn't mean there's no emotion. It doesn't mean there's void of empathy or sympathy, but it's just clearly like these are the facts of the situation. This is very pragmatic. We're doing this only because we have to do this. We're having this difficult conversation only because the situation requires it, and it's in the best interest of everyone to do it. So I kind of feel like that's kind of the role conscience serves in our
I think that's
minds.
fair. Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, that's well said. You know, I think is particularly when it comes to the more difficult conversations, we're really in the objective space, right?
Yeah.
This did or did not happen, and the conversation we're having exclusively is fact based, right? I can exhibit empathy, but
Yes.
not without the facts of the conversation, right? Particularly when we're having a difficult conversation. And I think in that way, HR team, HR functions do tend to be the conscience or the voice of reason, the voice of what we can and can't do within a business. Some degree of subjectivity in some cases, but in general, it is fact based. It is pragmatic.
Yeah,
I would
just
say.
subjective in that, like, you
Yeah.
really know, like, each organization has its own identity, right? So you do sides like breaking laws or complying with laws. It's like,
Those
we
are
have
almost
decided.
easier. Like the Zoda just broke a law. It's like, okay, that's we can handle that. But so many times, like people things,
Yeah.
right? When you say, well, so the what your sort of conscience of the organization, right? When it comes to people, it's so rarely black and white, right? Sometimes people do something where you're just like, we have to let you go. It does happen.
Yeah.
But so often, like things with people, consternation, some butting heads or sort of those kinds of things, right? There's a lot of gray area there with people, and we have to like just think as objectively as we can around like what is the right outcome here? Like what is the outcome that we think makes the most sense for the people and for the organization? Right back to the are we for the business?
Yeah, right. I mean, because it's like legally, morally, ethically,
Yeah.
economically, like these are all factors that play into decisions and like
Oh, yeah.
all things that we, kill ourselves over as humans and like trying to make the right decision. Because of course there's costs and benefits in all those categories too, and like making certain decisions, and it's about finding the one, okay, but given all the information and how it will affect everything, this is the best outcome or the best decision that will likely have the best outcome for everyone involved. Yeah, it's a super, when you're emotional and you're in it, um, it's very, very hard to see all that clearly. And I do think that that is a very undervalued um, value or perspective that a great HR professional can bring to the table, but very few or probably do.
I agree, right? They might bring it when something happens, right? There's an event of some kind that they have house off for. But we need HR folks to bring it all the time, right? Around business decisions, around people decisions, good ones, good people decisions, right? Like these are the two or three potential outcomes based on these two or three decisions we can make. Let's have a conversation about it as a thought partner, not just like somebody did something stupid and now we're not sure how to handle it, right? Which is oftentimes, I think, where it ends up falling in the lack of HR to our own doing or because of our own doing, where I think true professionals that actually drive the business forward understand the responsibility that says like we're having this conversation from a business perspective about what we might want to do with people, how we might want to hire, open a new department, move somebody like who's never led a team before to leading a team. Like those conversations are really exciting and fun to have. When you have more of those we have, I'm actually quite confident we'll have fewer of those really unfortunate conversations. Might sound a little bit naive or too optimistic, but I truly believe that.
Sure.
I truly believe that. Yeah.
I heard this concept recently. I was listening to this book about crisis management, how to lead in a crisis, and it talked about this concept. I mean, yeah, HR enters the chat usually when there's crisis.
Pretty quickly, yeah.
But it talked about this concept of, I think it was a council of colonels or something like that. So like throughout history, great leaders and presidents have had kind of like these groups of people, council of colonels, where the people they go to like when they have to make these really difficult decisions, and each of them probably has a unique perspective from their own area of expertise or life experience, or they're weighing in and the leader doesn't necessarily listen to any one of them, but collectively all this input allows that leader to, have a well-rounded perspective to then make the best decision possible. And of course, that takes a very healthy, mature, emotionally intelligent, like secure leader to be able to recognize, like, I myself may not have all the answers or all the perspective, especially if you're a CEO of a larger company and your literal only mission is to like make money. You have to understand and realize you may have the limitations and blind slots that could be in the way of this. So I think, like, my point is saying all that is, if you're a leader and you're kind of poo-pooing some of this stuff or not giving it credibility, consider what that means about your leadership style. And if you want to be the strongest leader possible, why would you not have recognize your own potential limitations, which we all have them as people. There's no one who, is great at everything. And
Yeah.
surround yourself with people, and in this case, with a person who's going to offer this perspective, who's, in theory, well qualified or an expert on humans and this kind of stuff, to make sure that you are taking into consideration that factor, um, which has huge implications on business outcomes. It really does.
Yeah, having the humility to recognize that I need to ask a bunch of questions of a bunch of really smart people,
Yeah.
and something that I don't know enough about, or at least I think I know about, but I want to get other perspectives on. Takes a certain level of maturity
Yeah.
that not everyone has.
Yes, my point is, if you're listening and you're a business software, you think you know everything and you don't need this perspective, consider,
Hiring
if you
someone,
want to be
yeah.
a great leader, then these are the habits of great leaders and great business leaders, certainly throughout history. Yeah.
I mean, but I think bring it back to sort of this particular conversation, right? Then to me, great leaders, if they feel like they have an HR team or an HR person that maybe isn't exhibiting a little bit more of what we're talking about today, challenge that person to do it, right? And if you're an HR leader, whether you're CHRO or your first time as a generalist, challenge yourself to think about like, how can I be a thought partner? How can I be sort of exhibit some business savvy, that I'm not just an operator, right? Not somebody who is in HR operations. By that I mean that I'm actually somebody who is part of this business like anybody else, and I'm helping to drive
Yeah.
get that forward.
How can you earn that credibility instead of demanding it? Right. I see a lot of people taking that too.
That never works. They can demand it, but it usually doesn't go well.
Yeah. So okay, so I think only a couple more questions. So, one of the ways I think, so I guess the question is like, why does the people stuff matter? Why does investing in your people and spending time in your people and building these systems and making sure to have really great reward and recognition programs, but also systems to reinforce and redirect behavior that aligns with business missions? Like, why is all that valuable? And it all comes back to this concept of engagement and culture.
You posted about something like that too.
Yeah.
Engagement. Yeah.
My brain never stops. So, engagement and culture, which are such, in most of the business world, nebulous, fluffy, and a lot of times people roll their eyes and then think it's full crap.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you think about these concepts of engagement, culture, and why does it matter?
Well, I do think strongly that organizations have a responsibility to create sort of a work environment and working ecosystem, which is kind of an eye roll word, but a work ecosystem where people feel compelled not only to be there, but to do great work, right? And that doesn't mean always that I need to get paid more, have better benefits, have whatever that is important to that person, more time off, whatever it is. Those things are important. But just like I suggested that sort of the price of admission for an HR person is to be able to do certain things, like to me these days in particular, the price of admission to bringing somebody to the organization is like, pay better be right, benefits better be right. So let's just assume all those things are happening.
Yeah.
Right. To me, I think what compels most people, anyway, to perform well in a role and to stay in an organization for a long time, right? Performing well in a role could mean that they're engaged in the business. Let's just say that they're highly engaged workforce. Is to do good, meaningful work and also feel like I'm also working towards something else. It could be another opportunity. Maybe it's a promotion. We can't promote everybody, but I have to feel like as an employee that I have an opportunity at the company that I'm working at to grow, expand skills, job functions, opportunities.
Yeah.
Right. That I'm not just sort of a cog in this
Yeah.
sort of big machine.
Come and push a button every day. You don't know why. You don't
Right,
know.
exactly.
Who cares? Like,
And so for as much as I believe that an organization has a responsibility to create an environment where people sort of understand that that's how we operate, that that's the norm for us, and we also maybe like to have fun here too. I can't quite solve for this. I don't think an organization can solve for this. Is that I think we have to make sure that the people in the organization have a genuine curiosity and a genuine enthusiasm as people, as professionals as well. And that goes to like, who are we hiring? Right? Are we hiring sort of the right, not just skill set, but like the right minded person for what makes sense for our business? It's not so much, let's use HR as an example. It's not so much that I need an HR person, but what I really need is somebody who is a thought partner to me as it relates to the people, right? So that person might feel energized at work, whereas somebody who's just like, no, I just want to come in and run payroll every day may not feel like that's the right place for them. So finding the right person, I think, to fit where the organization is, and then build that ecosystem of like, I love working here. There's an opportunity from here. I'm not worried about pay or benefits or anything like
Why
that.
does it matter if people love coming to work?
Why does it matter if people love coming to work?
Yes.
Well, most people don't love going to work. I don't understand this question now.
Well, I
Ask me
mean,
differently.
obviously I believe in it, but like, why, you know, you say you believe organizations have a responsibility to basically help people be fulfilled in the job that they're doing at that organization.
It's
Why-
true though. The person should feel that way as well. I feel like they should
Yeah.
feel like they're burdens.
So basically, they're both tied to this thing together.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to do that if you're not hiring the right people.
Yeah.
You know, if you're not hiring for people who you think will feel inspired by that, will feel energized by that.
They offering.
That's right.
do.
Yeah. It's quite optimistic. I recognize that, right? But I think there's something to it.
Well, I think the organizations that are doing the best work when it comes to building purposeful people operations, that is an outcome of it. And yes, I guess where I was going is like trying to understand what you mean by they have a responsibility to, and like, yeah, you could say from like an ethos and moral and ethical standpoint in the world, we all should be trying to be the best we can be, including being the best employer we can be, and the best boss we can be, the best boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, whatever. So yeah, perhaps
Yeah, I mean, I'll be as blunt as I can with it, right? I think organizations have a responsibility to make sure that when people go to work, they aren't miserable there, right? So sometimes that's the work that you do, right? We can't necessarily solve for that, but right, I think all the other things, the work environment is great. We're hiring people that are driven, right? The leadership team, right? Our management team in particular, right? Really strong management team, right? I could love where I work, but my manager is not so great. And so maybe I'll start like clicking on LinkedIn jobs a little bit more than I used to, right? So we know that that manager level certainly has an impact on how people feel with their work. But I think overall, organizations have a responsibility to really set the stage for a great work environment, to do great work and feel like the work is meaningful. And then we're hiring people that we feel will be inspired by those things, right? That the work that they're going to be doing will contribute to bigger sort of picture of things. And then our management team, our leadership team, their direct leaders are there to help support them along the way, wherever they want to go. Whether that's to be promoted or to be in the same seat for a long time, whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely share that sentiment. I guess, the skeptical, more cynical leader or business owner may be like, listen, I've actually had clients say this to me before on their worst day, right? In a moment of frustration. I don't know how much they really mean it. Certainly like turn the corner at some point, but like, I don't really care how people feel at work. I just need them to come and do their job. But they do really care to some extent because I think they're not.
Well, they
evil.
should, because people will quit.
Well, but that's the point of getting to. So, like, if we're trying to sell this value HR to those people in the audience who kind of catch somewhat of that perspective,
Mhm.
yeah, I think the point is there is actual, though, measurable value. So if you're a more practical person, if you're more, A to B, like results oriented, whether or not you feel there's a responsibility to provide a great workplace where people feel fulfilled and happy and engaged, out of some ethos or ethical like requirements,
Yeah.
it behooves you though to do that as a business. There are business outcomes clearly data shows are directly tied to the like how engaged your employees feel. And engagement is such a misunderstood word or really not well defined word, but engagement does mean happy, fulfilled, motivated to be there. And like you said, like they
Right.
feel tied to be there because there's some purpose or mission, whether it's not letting their coworkers down or their bosses down or the organization down. The more highly engaged your staffers, the more productive they are and the more profitable your business is. And there's clear data over all the time that shows that. So the point is like, again, whether you want to do it to be a good person or you want your business to be successful, there's so much to gain. There's so much to gain from investing in as part of your business.
But no, it's funny. We talked about some things almost similar to this when last time I think we had coffee together a few weeks back, which was around to the success profile. Like what's not just the job description, not just the posting or whatever, but an actual success profile of a person in each of the roles that we have in our organization, right? What are the best of the best in our company now? What are they doing, right? What are their certain not just personality traits, but what are their general sort of professional traits? What is their background in terms of professional background or academic background, whatever it is? Like, what is the profile of a successful person at our company? And how are we making sure that we bring in as many people that align with that profile of a successful person in our company to help continue to drive that sort of business forward and success forward? And it's not just to only hire like-minded people, but to help understand. We know that if somebody exhibits these qualities, they're likely to be successful here. If they're successful here, they're likely to be motivated here, and they're engaged in all those good things. Everything else again being equal back, that we're paying, all benefits are good, but all those things have to be sort of there.
Yeah, I think it's a good question too to ask your like if you want to understand the proof in the pudding of some of this. Like, say you're a business owner listening to this, and you have one individual who's performing really well, another isn't, or one team or department that's performing really well, another one that isn't. Start to ask questions why. I guarantee you, the answers are going to align with what we're seeing here, which is it's a leader issue, it's an which is probably affecting an engagement issue, or or a mishire type issue, or whatever it is. Like, it's going to be something that we're talking about that a real purposeful HR operation could address, and you can see, again, the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah, that's right. And it's role specific, right? If you probably wouldn't hire somebody necessarily, maybe you would, but typically you wouldn't hire somebody who's particularly entrepreneurial, who maybe even started and sold a business, whatever it is, like to process forms all day, right? You have to match in many ways, like what makes somebody successful and what drives somebody to the roles that you're hiring. And there's nothing right or wrong about somebody who's just completely job oriented. I go to work, I make money, I do the job, and I'm good, versus somebody who's career, somebody who's calling oriented, all important, all good. But that mismatch of sort of the success profile of a person with the role we're hiring for is potentially problematic. And then add to that, you'd be a non-great manager or whatever it is, and then people will be disengaged.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so two other questions. How do you know when HR is successful?
How do I? So I boy, this is tough. So typically, I mean, oh really? Okay.
Yeah.
So I feel, I guess I'll share from my perspective. I feel like a people team, right, an HR team is operating successfully. First and foremost, the business is performing well, and we're supporting the business needs from a people perspective. Whether that's actually staffing perspective, that's having the right people, that's potentially learning and development, maybe not functional job learning and development.
How do you observe that? Like, how do you know? If you're from the outside looking in and you're going to look at like 100 companies, how do you tell, like, how do you know whether HR is operating effectively in each of them? Like, you had to grade HR operations across 100 companies. You give them each a grade. Like, what are you going to look at?
Well, if I were
From
just
an
an observer's
standpoint.
standpoint, here are a handful of things that I would be looking at to say and I would do this actually in an assessment as well, right? As a fractional HR person, I would at least know. All right, so what is, first of all, do we have any pending sort of lawsuits, any major employee relations issues that we think will cost the business money, or will be sort of involving some litigation? What do those look like? Do we have any?
That's very good, easy.
The next step of that is like, where are they stemming from? Right? Is it consistent issues across the board? Is it one department? Like, what is actually happening here? Yes, superficially, we have to deal with them if they exist, but more deeply, like, what might be driving this? So I would look at those.
Well, number of claims.
I would look at whatever meaningful number we think makes sense in terms of turnover for the business. Depending on the size of the business and the lifespan of the business, we might hone in on retention. Some cases we might hone in on turnover. Other cases we might hone in on unwanted attrition. Typically wouldn't be all of those numbers. We try to get a better understanding, like based off of the lifespan of the business and where the business is in terms of its growth. Which one of those metrics are actually telling the real story about what's happening with the employee turnover?
And there's good and bad turnover, but in overall, if you have high turnover, it's probably not a good sign that you're doing a good job selecting, retaining, like selecting good talent, retaining good talent, getting rid of bad talent early, releasing it. Yeah.
That's right. In particular, I mean, many organizations aren't really following unwanted attrition, but should be, right? Who are the people that we wanted to stay, that for whatever reason you left?
Yeah.
Right? We can, to some degree, live with higher turnover. We can probably solve for that. But why do the good people keep going? What are we measuring that? And if we are, what's actually happening there? So that's something that I would typically look at. Is one of those metrics, in particular, if we have unwanted attrition, I would take a look at what's going on there. Depending on if there's engagement data, I may see if there's an employee net promoter score. What does that look like? How likely are your recommend as a place to work. Some people believe in it, some people don't. I happen to at least understand it from a pulse survey perspective. Say, like, at any given time, would people recommend working here, or would they actively tell people never work here? And so we got some great turnaround stories for that. But overall engagement survey, I'll look at the comments more than anything else and see if, like, common themes and those kinds of things. So there are a few spots that I for sure look at. If I have access to a succession plan as well, whether one exists and who is on it and how ready they are, gives me a really good sense of how the HR team is functioning in the business, because that means that, say we have a really healthy succession plan, that we at least did the activity.
Yeah.
And if we have a healthy succession plan and we know sort of when people will be promoted and whether they can move and all those good things, that means that we've engaged with the leadership team to really go through the exercise of understanding what that looks like.
They're strategic.
Right. And so if we're ready to grow, and I can say, well, what does the succession plan look like, whether it's a 9-box or something else?
Yeah.
If we have it, then I'm like, maybe we are ready to grow, and you look at it. If we don't have it, then I say, like, I don't know that we're ready to grow, because who the heck knows who's going to fill the next role once it opens up? Are they here? Are they not here? We need to know that. So I look at those things.
I think that's great. That's a great list. Thanks for
Yeah,
that.
it's probably longer.
No, but I think, okay, so if you're listening to this, be like, do I need HR? Take a look. Do you have any claims or pending litigation that's appointment related? How many do you have compared to, like, how many employees you have? It's also, some of it's just unavoidable in our litigious environment, but still, more is more.
That's another podcast.
Yeah. We can't actually air that one.
No.
2, what's your turnover rate? Do you even track it? Maybe just do some quick number crunching for the last year and see what that's like. 3, what's the general, I guess, sentiment of your staff, right? What's the feeling? Can you do a pulse check? That I love the employee net promoter score. Like, you're asking the simple question of your staff, would you recommend this as a place to work? That's it. Obviously, well, people say no. That's probably kind of good sign.
That's right.
So can you do something like that? And then, yeah, I think that's a great last kind of metric is, do you have any sort of succession plan, or what sort of strategic planning have you done around people at all in your organization? If the answer is no, that's not a good sign. So do your little audit and see. If you can't answer those questions well and the answers are bad, then maybe you want to consider getting some HR help. Or
right.
you taking that part of your business more seriously, because you only stand to gain. I think a lot of people think HR people come in and it's I can see even with some of my clients, I think things get harder when you start working together before they get better, because we do start exposing problems. And there's a point in some clients where you can see they're like, what did I get myself into? Like, why did I invite this into my business?
Right.
But there's always a come around to the other side where those things start to be addressed and then go away. But then they start to see numbers that get up in the business, right? If people are happier coming to work, all of a sudden production is going up, and they're being much more, profitable or successful than they didn't even know that potential existed there. So yeah, it may feel like you don't want to invite this scrutiny into your business, or just like another thing to have to care about, but it's so worth doing. So.
It is. And I mean, this is where, again, I don't mean to just like keep beating a dead horse here, but the HR professional, right? The HR professional often will be like, here's our retention number, here's our turnover number. Enjoy.
Right.
What we really need everybody to do is like, you know what I noticed? I noticed that I looked at retention, I looked at turnover, fine, whatever. I was really looking at attrition, and I looked at, like, a handful of people in this particular department are leaving, and let's say we have a succession plan. On the succession plan, we know that there were at least core players, if not maybe a little bit even higher. Something's going on here.
Right.
Now I need to proactively have a conversation with department head, the CEO, depending on the size of the company, about what's going on here, right? I can't just leave it at, like, retention's bad or turnover's bad, and a lot do.
Yeah.
Here's the number, here's the reported number.
There's no point in having
Right.
metrics. Yeah.
And that's where I keep going with this. Like, to do that work is what the real work is for an HR pro.
And it's worth doing. It's not like the perspective of lies. Like, why, stop looking for problems where they don't exist. That's not true.
Right.
Where there's smoke, there's fire, or there will be eventually. And this is something I say all the time too. Discomfort avoided, it's just discomfort delayed. So you can ignore that smoke over there and pretend that that's not a problem when there's turnover in that department, but eventually it's potentially going to get to like a business critical point where you're going to put so much brain drain in that department, and you're Or you have a top talent person that's going to get aggravated and annoyed or frustrated by that, or just think, I don't want to work in a place that tolerates this kind of behavior, and they're going to leave.
Right.
And all of a sudden, now it's too late, and you let this habit fester, and you could have been far more proactive about dealing with it and avoided the pain.
Great.
Yeah. But you're right. If you don't have someone, in the HR person, like the fire tower looking out for the smoke to be like, hey, like there's something over there I could be in to look out, you're going to miss it. And if it's not someone's job in the business to sit in that seat, to be held accountable to survey the landscape and identify that stuff, it's not going to get done.
Sure. Agreed.
All right. Last question.
Okay.
If you had to give, I'm trying to make these as tangible as possible.
All right.
So if you had to give, assuming most of the listeners are HR, maybe they're HR people, maybe they're
HR people turned it off.
They're no, they feel really good about this conversation,
Right.
or
They're yelling at us, maybe.
Yeah. Business owners listening as well.
Sure.
If you had to give one takeaway tip of like what's something, if you do nothing else from an HR standpoint in your business, or the most credible kind of thing, if you give one piece of advice of something HR will lead it to address, explore, tackle, implement into the business tomorrow, if they could, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, if I were to suggest one thing to do is honestly to bring in a person who can be an HR thought partner, whether that's a people thought partner, however you want to phrase it, whether that's an internal person, a consultant, could be anyone who has a perspective on how people best function within a business as it relates in context to how the business performs, right? So it has to have that sort of business savvy and then combine that with what's happening with people in the business. I think if you can start there and understand that dynamic, you can solve proactively for many of the challenges that might be on the horizon, and can also just drive the business forward. So it's somebody who can be a thought partner on what's actually happening with people within the business.
I think that's great advice. I'll add to that. It's better saying if you aren't convinced yet that you want to bring another person in, or you're like, no, my budget,
Yeah.
I would say task someone on your leadership team with being that person.
Yeah.
It saves them. I mean, of course, only if you think that they have some ability to do it. But hey, when we have our one-on-ones or when we have our leadership meetings, I want you to make sure that you're the one who's going to be thinking of this and bring that perspective to the table and poke holes of things from that perspective.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good place to start. If they're not convinced they need to have a full-time or be part-time HR person, fractional or otherwise coming in, that might be cool. But yeah, I think that's a really great idea to start like exploring what it is they're missing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would say, don't think of HR as like the employee relations handbook, whatever people. Assume that comes with the person, but look for the people that are the thought partners in the channel tree.
Yeah, or just add it as an agenda item on your leadership meetings with your leadership team. Like at the end, okay, closing topic.
Yeah.
What people, opportunities, or problems should we be aware of addressing that we're not? Yeah, because then you don't make it an item to think about. You're never gonna think about. That's right. Until it's unavoidable and like unignorable, you're gonna probably ignore it. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for coming in.
Appreciate it.
Hopefully, we just did the HR profession, so much justice, and the profession is now going to, make leaps and bounds as a result of our conversation.
We'll see. We get some angry people and happy people stick out, I think.
Normally, we want to hear all the comments.
For sure.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. And again, just close by telling us a little bit about your business and how people can reach you if they're interested.
Yep. Company's called Work Exceptional, and it can be reached at jeff@workexceptional.com. Executive coaching is one piece, learning and organizational development is another, and the crux of our business, the biggest piece of our business, is fractional CHROs, chief people officer type work.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, and we compete, but there's plenty of opportunity to go around.
Oh, yes.
So reach out to Jeff where you
You have all the good fortune in Buffalo. I don't have much.
That's true. I know you.
Only a couple, but that's it.
I know when you're interested in doing maybe more Buffalo, and I'm interested in maybe taking more outside of Buffalo, but the grass always looks greener.
That's
so
true. That's true.
That's what we're summary. All right, but thanks so much.
Thanks. Appreciate it.